Welcome to C++ function syntax. In this video, we're going to talk about briefly the difference between an engine and a library and how this relates to our console application. We will be looking at how the console knows where to find our code. That's an important point. And then we will look at what's called the syntax of a function in C++, how it's laid out. We'll write the minimum C++ program to remove an error and end up running our code so that it just says this, just nothing, but the console has no errors and says press any key to continue. It's a very, very simple few lines, but it's important that you understand why we're writing those lines. In the first section, we just wrote them. Don't look back there and cheat, by the way. But in the first section, we just wrote these lines. Now that you understand the anatomy of a function, once you understand that, you'll be able to actually write it yourself and have a much better ownership of what's going on. So let's dive in and get this done. Okay, so here we are at our project. What we need to understand is that to even write any code, we need to know where the system is looking for our code. So in the case of an engine like Unreal Engine, it's an engine, which means that it calls our code. In a library, you may have heard people talking about using libraries. The difference there is that we write code that calls out to the library. But we're in an environment, both here in the console and in Unreal, we're in an engine, effectively, and that means that something is calling into our code, at least to get started. And right now, this will not run. Anything we write will not run because the system does not know where to find our code. It's missing something. Now, if you're on Xcode, by the way, before we do anything, it has already solved this problem for you. So I'd suggest you watch this video until I show you about the anatomy of functions. And then once I've explained the anatomy of functions, you'll know what's already written on your screen and you'll be good to move on. All right, so let's just try running this. Debug, start without debugging. Now, one of a couple of things may happen. You may get these horrible errors down here. And if you're lucky, you'll get, would you like to run the last successful build? Or maybe you'll just come straight to this. But regardless, it's not working right. Why? Because we have errors. Whenever we've got errors down here in our error list, that's bad. And this is running, but it's immediately giving us an error. It's saying this is not recognized as an internal or external command operable program or batch file, right? So it doesn't like our code. That's what we need to set out to solve. And you could get a very similar problem inside Unreal where it just doesn't know where to find your code. All right? So I'm going to tell you, firstly, how a function is set up inside C++. And then I'm going to tell you the anatomy of the function that we need to write. And then I'm going to challenge you to write it. So the syntax of a function in C++. What's syntax, firstly? Syntax is the structure of these statements that we write. So it's telling us how to write in such a way that the compiler understands what we're saying. What's a function? A function is something that does something. Here's a very trivial and simple function called double me. You send in a number as an integer, which is a whole number that you can count on your fingers, and it returns another integer. And we call it double me just to prevent any confusion with reserved words like double, which are also another type of number. So, what's the syntax? Firstly, we have the return type. That's the first thing we need to put in. It could be an integer, it could be a void, which means nothing comes back. It could be a character or a string, all sorts of things. But in our case, it's an integer coming back. Then we must have a space here. That's indicated by this underscore. Must have a space. Then it's the name. Now, our coding standard says that we're going to use uppercase, and I'm actually going to use separate uppercase letters in the middle of my words just to distinguish where a second word starts. So double me. Then there may or may not be a space here. I've used an inconsistency on purpose just to show you that you need to be able to see what the compiler sees, which is it ignores this type of white space. Generally, we won't put a space, but there may be a space. Then int, or whatever the type of the thing coming in is, and then you give the thing coming in a name. And we're going to give it the name number in this case. And this is something called a variable, or actually it's being used as a parameter in a method. It's another way of describing what this thing number is. And it only exists inside double. Once we get outside this curly brace, this number is no longer exists. And generally it's bad practice to actually modify this thing, but we'll talk about that later. So number comes in and it gets doubled, multiplied by 2, and then returned out of the function as integer type. Okay, so that's what comes in. An integer comes in, gets doubled, goes out. And that's the general pattern. Now, the reason I'm telling you all this is because in a moment, I'm going to challenge you to write your own method that's going to allow our code to actually run properly. So here's your challenge. Write the minimal C++ program. The return type is int, short for integer. The function name we want is main, lowercase like that. It takes no parameters. And for extra credit, make it return 0. test this by running and seeing if the error goes away when you try and go Control F5 for debug and run without debugging. Okay, go ahead, pause the video and do this challenge now. Welcome back. So take a look at what we need to do. Int is the return type. It's come up in blue, that's good. It's in a list, that's good. That means that the IntelliSense or the system knows that what we're typing. Now, by the way, as I've said, if you're in Xcode, you can stop watching now because it's already solved this problem for you. You can move on to the next video. There's nothing more to learn. We're just going to type out the method that's already on your screen. So main is the name. Now, I'm going to not have a space. I'm going to use lowercase because that's what the system's expecting here. Okay, and then I'm going to put in some curly braces. Now, you can put them on this line like this, but a good idea with any braces is to open them and close them. Open them and close them. Now, actually, this system is doing it for me. Visual Studio is closing them for me, which is good. So I can just come straight in and put a return like that. Now, you'll sometimes see the brace there. It doesn't make any difference, actually. None of this white space makes a difference. What does make a difference to me is that we have an indentation. So I'm going to come down, but I do want a tab. Not 4 spaces. It's the same as 4 spaces, but I want a tab before I do anything else. And for the extra credit, I want to return. It's a good sign that it's filling this in. By the way, as soon as you see it's got the right thing, you can hit tab. Okay, it's gone blue. It's recognized the statement. 0. And then remember I said that all statements need a semicolon on the end. Ah, cool. All right, now before, by the way, I'd put my semicolon on the end. Look, there was a little red dot here. Start to get used to this. This is the integrated development environment saying it doesn't understand what's going on at this close bracket. And that's saying I expect a semicolon. So put a semicolon. Okay, cool. Now, let's go debug, start without debugging, or Control F5. Ah, this is it. We have the console coming up and just saying press any key to continue. It is running and it's not complaining. The returning 0 just means that when the console app finishes, it returns a status of 0. It's exited normally. That's it. You have done it. I want you to save everything now and congratulate yourself that it's even more minimal than what we did in the setup section, right? But I hope that you understand a little bit more about what's going on. The system is looking for one of the files in my project, and it's looking through the files and saying, do any of these contain a method called main? Ah, here's the one called main. Great. Now, in that method, let's go ahead and do what it says. Well, it says do nothing, actually. It just says return, I leave, with a status code of 0. But at least you know pretty much why we got here. What we're going to do next, by the way, is come above this return and start actually writing our game at last. So if you have been fiddling, you'll notice a star. The star means the file has changed. Again, you can just save all, and we're good to go. See you in the next video.